The perfect lie behind the wedding smile. From the outside, my life looked perfect. The kind of perfection people scroll past on Instagram and think, she has it all. A beautiful house in the suburbs of Seattle. A husband who seemed endlessly patient. And a mother-in-law who wore a smile so sweet, it almost hid the venom behind it. Almost. My name is Emily Carter, and the day I married Ryan, I thought I had stepped into a dream. But dreams, I've learned, can turn to nightmares in the blink of an eye, especially when someone else is pulling the strings behind the curtain. It started small. So small I almost missed it. A raised eyebrow when I cooked something not quite like Ryan's favorite. A gentle correction when I folded the laundry the wrong way. Tiny things that didn't seem worth fighting over. But behind every small jab was a quiet intention, to make me feel less. To make me question myself. And it worked. Ryan's mother, Margaret, was the kind of woman who dressed her cruelty in politeness. Every insult came wrapped in silk. Every manipulation came disguised as concern. Oh, Emily dear, you must be exhausted. Running a home is harder than it looks. I did it all, of course, without help. At first, I laughed it off. I told myself she was just protective. That maybe I was being oversensitive. But the day she moved into our guest room temporarily after her hip surgery, my marriage began to crumble, one whispered word at a time. Margaret made sure she was always there when Ryan came home. Dinner ready. Stories rehearsed. She'd smile at me and then, in front of him, drop her little grenades wrapped in love. Emily tried her best today, Ryan, but the roast didn't quite turn out. Don't worry, I made your favorite. He'd laugh. Ibes Mila. And something inside me would die a little more. Weeks turned into months. Ryan began comparing. Comparing how his mother did things and how I should try to learn from her experience. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd lie awake, listening to the quiet hum of her control tightening around our lives. The worst part wasn't her words. It was how she made him see me differently. Every time he looked at me, it wasn't through the eyes of my husband anymore, but through hers. And she loved that power. One night, I overheard them in the kitchen. Margaret's voice low, careful. She's young, Ryan. You rushed into this. I'm not saying she's a bad person. Just not the right person for you. I remember standing in the hallway, frozen, the plate I was holding slipping from my hands and shattering on the floor. That sound, sharp and final, felt like the crack of my heart breaking. She didn't even come to see if I was okay. She just kept talking. And my husband didn't defend me. He just sighed and said, "Maybe you're right, Mom. Maybe I rushed." That night, I sat in the bathroom, staring at my reflection under the harsh light. The girl who had dreamed of a love built on trust and tenderness was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, a woman hollowed out by manipulation. But beneath that hollow, something else was growing. Something darker. Something that whispered, enough. I wasn't going to let her destroy the home I built. If she wanted a war, she was going to get one. And this time, I'd play her game better than she ever could. Because control isn't given. It's taken. And I was done giving. The silent war behind closed doors. Morning came like a performance. Margaret played the part of the perfect mother-in-law, serving breakfast with a saintly smile. Ryan scrolled through his phone, half listening to both of us. I poured coffee, pretending not to notice how she added sugar to his cup before I could. Like a quiet reminder that she knew him better than I did. It was the kind of cruelty you couldn't prove. No shouting. No insults. Just slow poison, disguised as love. That day, I decided to stop reacting. If she wanted to win through manipulation, I'd learn her tactics, but I'd use them smarter. I would become her mirror. I began to observe everything. The way she looked at Ryan before speaking. The tone she used when pretending to worry. The way she twisted her kindness into control. And most importantly, I noticed her weaknesses, the cracks behind her perfect act. She couldn't stand being ignored. She thrived on attention and validation. So I took both away. When she criticized, I smiled. When she hinted, I stayed silent. When she faked kindness, I matched it with calm politeness. The silence made her restless. She needed reaction to survive. It didn't take long before Ryan started noticing the tension. He'd ask, "Is everything okay between you two?" I'd just smile and say, "Of course. Your mom's wonderful." Because I knew how much that silence would eat at Margaret. And it did. Every quiet breakfast, every calm response, it drove her insane. I could see it in her eyes, that flicker of rage she hid behind her smile. Then came the breaking point. One evening, Ryan came home late from work. Margaret was waiting in the living room, pretending to read but clearly rehearsing something. When he walked in, she looked up with fake concern. "I'm worried about Emily," she said softly. "She's been distant. I think she's unhappy here." Ryan frowned. "Why would you say that?" Margaret sighed. "I caught her crying yesterday. She said she feels trapped in this house, that you don't understand her anymore." I froze. From the kitchen doorway, I heard every word. And the worst part? Ryan believed her hesitation more than he believed my silence. He came to me that night, confusion clouding his face. "Emily, are you unhappy? You can tell me." It took everything in me not to scream. Not to tell him that his mother was the one breaking me apart piece by piece. But I remembered, this was her game. Emotional manipulation. So I took a deep breath and whispered, "No, I'm just tired. Maybe we all need some space." And that's when it happened. Margaret leaned in from the hallway and said, "Maybe I should move back home. I don't want to be a burden." She said it like an angel. But her eyes looked straight into mine and dared me to say no. If I begged her to stay, she'd win. If I agreed, she'd twist it into guilt. So I smiled. "Calm. Steady. Deadly. That's a great idea, Margaret. You deserve rest and space. Let me help you pack." The silence that followed was delicious. For the first time, I saw her mask crack. Just slightly. Ryan looked stunned. Margaret's lips parted, her confidence slipping for a heartbeat. But she smiled again, quickly recovering. "Oh, no need, dear. I'll leave when I'm ready." And I knew right then, she wasn't leaving. Not yet. Because control was her oxygen. And I had just cut off her supply. That night, when the house fell silent, I stood by the window, watching her reflection in the glass as she pretended to read again. She wasn't reading. She was planning. And so was I. This wasn't over. This was the beginning of a quiet war. A war fought not with shouting, but with strategy. And I was finally ready to fight on her level. The cracks beneath her crown. Margaret believed she ruled this house. But she had no idea how much power I'd taken back just by staying silent and watching her unravel. In the days that followed, her behavior shifted from subtle to desperate. She lingered in rooms longer than before. Hovered behind doors. Repeated herself in conversations just to see if I was listening. Every morning, she'd cook Ryan's breakfast with a smile that trembled around the edges. A smile too forced, too perfect. It was working. Her control was slipping. But I knew she wasn't the kind of woman to surrender quietly. No, she was the kind who'd burn everything to keep the illusion alive. One Saturday morning, I found her in my bedroom. Not by accident. She was going through my drawers, pretending to look for a spare charger. Our eyes met, hers full of challenge, mine of calm fury. She held up a photo of Ryan and me from our honeymoon, her voice dripping sweetness. "You two looked so happy then. Such a shame how distant he seems now." I didn't respond. I simply took the photo from her hand, set it back on the nightstand, and said, "Please don't go through my things again." Her smile froze. "Oh, Emily, you're too sensitive." I was just looking for control, I interrupted softly. That silence after? It was the first real silence between us. Not the calm kind, but the kind that says the war just turned real. From that day, Margaret stopped pretending. She didn't try to hide her manipulation anymore. Instead, she began isolating me from Ryan completely. Every time he walked in, she'd rush to fill his ears with updates, exaggerated stories about how I'd forgotten things, or how I'd been too emotional lately. She started leaving out unpaid bills on the counter, hinting that I was careless with money. Once, she even misplaced his favorite watch, and somehow it ended up in my closet. She was framing me piece by piece, trying to paint me as unstable, ungrateful, unfit to hold the marriage she wanted to control. And Ryan. He was beginning to believe her. The man who once held me through sleepless nights now questioned everything I said. The warmth in his voice had turned cold, cautious. He'd glance at his mother before answering me, as if she was the judge of every word I spoke. That night, as I lay awake beside him, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I was losing him. Not to another woman, but to the woman who had raised him. And maybe, that was even worse. I could have left. Packed my bags and walked away from the manipulation, the tension, the constant gaslighting. But I didn't. Because leaving would mean she won. And I wasn't going to hand her that victory. So instead of leaving, I started planning. If Margaret wanted control, I'd give her exactly that, but on my terms. I'd let her feel safe again. Confident. Powerful. And then, when she least expected it, I'd take everything back. Her influence, her image, her grip on Ryan's mind. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet, patient, precise. That night, as she poured herself tea in the dim kitchen, she didn't notice me watching from the hallway. The steam rose between us like a ghost, the ghost of the woman I used to be, the one who tolerated her cruelty. That version of me was gone. And what replaced her wasn't afraid anymore. I whispered under my breath, so softly only I could hear it. You taught me how to play this game, Margaret. Now watch how it ends. The turn of the knife. By the time autumn painted the streets of Seattle in amber, Margaret's empire of control was beginning to rot from the inside. And I was the one loosening every thread, silently. I started small, the same way she once did with me. A smile here. A compliment there. Ryan, your mom's been such a help lately, I'd say during dinner. And she would beam, convinced I'd surrendered. But I hadn't. I was studying her, just as she once studied me. And I was about to flip the narrative she'd built, right in front of her son. Margaret thrived on attention, so I gave it, but only when Ryan was watching. I praised her cooking. I invited her to pick colors for the living room paint. I even offered to help her with her medication schedule. To anyone else, it looked like reconciliation. To her, it was victory. To me, it was camouflage. Because behind that curtain of politeness, I was collecting proof. Every lie, every act, every manipulation. Ryan had started leaving his phone on the kitchen counter more often, and I noticed how she'd text him while pretending to nap. Messages like, I don't think Emily appreciates you the way she should. So one afternoon, I borrowed his phone to check a delivery, took screenshots, and sent them quietly to my own number. I also recorded her little monologues, the ones she thought no one heard. How she'd talk to herself while cooking, muttering insults between sentences like, useless girl doesn't deserve him. And I waited. Patiently. The opportunity came at Thanksgiving. We were hosting Ryan's sister, her husband, and a few of his colleagues. The house smelled of cinnamon and turkey, laughter bouncing through the walls. Margaret loved audiences. It gave her another stage to perform her perfection. She hovered near Ryan, praising him, belittling me with subtle jokes. Emily tried so hard this year, she said sweetly, though I did have to fix a few of her little mistakes. Laughter followed. Not cruel, just awkward. But it was enough. I smiled. Because tonight was the night I'd stop being her victim. When dinner ended, I stood up, lifted my glass and said, before we all go for dessert, there's something I'd like to share. A little project I've been working on. I connected my phone to the TV. Margaret froze. The first clip played, her voice, crystal clear. She doesn't deserve him. I'll make sure he sees that. A murmur swept across the room. Her eyes darted to me, wide, trembling. Emily, what is this? I didn't answer. I let the next message roll, her texts to Ryan, the ones questioning my loyalty, my love. And then, the final recording, her call to a neighbor saying, if Emily leaves, I can finally have Ryan back to myself. The silence afterward was louder than any scream. Ryan's face was pale, disbelief clouding his eyes. "Mom," he whispered. "You said this." She tried to speak, her voice breaking. She's twisting it, Ryan. "You know I'd never." I looked at her calmly. I don't have to twist what was already bent. Tears welled in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. Because behind those tears wasn't guilt, it was the terror of losing control. Ryan stood slowly, his gaze shifting between us. "Mom, I think it's best if you go home. Tonight." Her breath hitched. "Ryan, please." "Please," he repeated, his tone cold. "Enough." She looked at me one last time, hatred burning behind her shame. And I smiled. Not out of joy. Out of release. That night, when she left, the house felt silent for the first time in months. Peaceful. Empty. Ryan apologized again and again, trying to understand how he'd been blind for so long. I didn't blame him. Manipulation isn't obvious. It's invisible until it isn't. When he fell asleep that night, I stood by the window, watching the lights of her car disappear down the street. And I whispered, "You tried to break my marriage, Margaret. But in the end, you broke your own crown." But something inside me still stirred. A quiet intuition that this wasn't the end. Women like Margaret don't vanish, they rebuild. And I knew somewhere out there, she was already planning her next move. The final goodbye. For a few weeks, it felt like I could finally breathe again. The air inside our home didn't carry her perfume, her whispers, or her invisible tension. Ryan and I began talking again, really talking. Like two people rebuilding something sacred from ashes. But healing after manipulation isn't peace. It's quiet. Too quiet. And in that quiet, sometimes, the ghosts of control still linger. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected her name to appear. Every knock at the door made my heart tense. Because Margaret might have left our house, but she hadn't left our lives. It started with small things again, a note in the mail with no return address. Family should never turn on family. Then a call to Ryan's office pretending to be from an old friend, checking in on our marriage. And once, when I came home from the grocery store, there were flowers on the porch. The card read, "Forgiveness is a virtue, dear." Her handwriting. Her game. Still going. I could have called the police. I could have confronted her. But I didn't. Because confrontation was what she wanted, reaction was her victory. Instead, I did something different. I invited her for coffee. Ryan didn't want me to. He thought I was reopening wounds. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. Not the kind that destroys. This was about reclaiming what she could never touch again, my peace. When she arrived, she looked smaller. Older. Like someone whose power had been stripped away piece by piece until she was just a shadow of her former self. But her eyes, they still searched for control. "Emily," she said softly, sitting across from me. "I didn't come here to fight." "I know," I replied. "You came to explain." "You always Donnerstag." She blinked, thrown off by my calm. "I made mistakes," she said carefully. "But I only wanted to protect my son." I leaned forward. From what? Love? Happiness? Or the idea that he could live without you dictating his every breath? Her lips trembled. "You've turned him against me." "No, Margaret," I said gently. "You did that. I just showed him what was already there." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe hummed softly around us, people talking, music playing, but our silence was heavier than any noise. Finally, she whispered, "You think you've won?" I smiled. "No. I didn't win. I healed. There's a difference." That hit her harder than anything else I could have said. Because for people like Margaret, control is their identity. Without it, they don't know who they are. When she left that day, there was no dramatic ending. No shouting. Just a quiet understanding between two women. One who built her life around control, and one who learned to live beyond it. Months later, Ryan and I renewed our vows. Not in a church or a crowd, but on a quiet lakeside with only us and the wind. No witnesses. No interference. Just two people who had finally seen the truth. Love can survive manipulation, but only if both people choose to see it. As I stood there, sunlight warming my skin, I thought of her, of all the ways she'd tried to break me. And I realized something powerful. She hadn't destroyed me. She'd forged me. Every cruel word, every silent jab, every attempt to control me, it had built the woman standing there now. Not bitter. Not broken. But awake. I smiled at the horizon, a quiet tear escaping. Because in the end, Margaret had taught me the most important lesson of all. Control belongs to those who stop needing it. And I had finally stopped.